You ever had someone march onto your property and scream at you like you're a criminal? Because that's exactly how my new life in the farmhouse began. The sun was still low in the sky, a golden September morning, and I was carrying boxes from the back of a dusty U-Haul when I heard the sound of the front gate creaking shut behind me. It wasn't a friendly creak either. It was sharp, metallic, the kind that makes you instantly turn your head. And there she was. A woman striding across my gravel driveway like she owned the place. Clipboard in one hand, manila folder in the other. Her heels kicking up little puffs of dust with every step. At first, I thought maybe this was a neighbor bringing a welcome basket or someone curious about the new guy on the block. I actually smiled. That smile didn't last long. She stopped 3 feet from my moving truck, squared her shoulders like a drill sergeant, and declared in a voice that carried across the yard, "Sir, I'm Coincidental Mitchell, president of Heights HOA. This property requires immediate compliance with community standards." The words hit me harder than the sun beating down on my neck. Compliance? HOA? My first reaction was confusion because this farmhouse, this dream property I'd been chasing for 3 years, was specifically outside of any HOA. I'd researched it for months, county records, title, insurance, 3 different attorneys, even the original 1870s land grant. Every shred of evidence confirmed what I wanted most, freedom. No board telling me what color my shutters had to be. No fines for leaving a garden hose out. No strangers dictating how I should live on my own land. So when this woman stood there with the confidence of a police officer serving a warrant, I felt my stomach drop. I set the box down on the porch and said, as calmly as I could, "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this farmhouse is outside your HOA boundaries. I have documentation." I pulled out my own folder, thick with survey maps, legal opinions, county stamps. The kind of stuff that had taken me late nights and too many cups of coffee to verify. I held it out, expecting her to look. Maybe even argue her side with some clarity, but she barely glanced at it, didn't even touch the papers. Her lips curled into this sharp smile as she said, "Your documentation is incorrect. This property has been in violation for years." That word violation landed heavy. I remember my hands tightening on the folder, the edges digging into my palms. For a second, doubt crept in. Had I missed something? Was there some boundary change I overlooked? But no, I knew my research. I knew this land was mine, free and clear. That's when my wife, Judy, stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans. She'd been unpacking dishes inside, probably wondering why her husband was already in some sort of heated debate. Corinne shifted instantly, her tone softening but her words sharper. "Ma'am, I'm sure you want to fit in with community standards. Non-compliance affects everyone's property values." Judy's a high school teacher. She's got a radar for fake authority, the same look she gives students when they hand in an essay. She picked up Corinne's papers, squinted at them, and asked, "Where are the originals? These look like copies." And that's when the mask slipped. Corinne's voice shot up 3 octaves. "Illegal questioning of HOA authority," she snapped, clutching her folder, as if Judy's simple question had threatened her entire world. She said illegal like it was her favorite word, like tossing it around would make it true. Here's the thing about authority: real authority welcomes scrutiny. Real authority doesn't crumble the moment someone asks for proof. And as an engineer, I know details. I couldn't help noticing her seals were too shiny, her fonts inconsistent, the whole packet just a little off, like a counterfeit ID you'd spot if you looked close enough. I decided to make it simple. I said, "Let's call the county planning office. They'll settle this in 5 minutes." Any normal person, if they truly believed they were right, would jump at that, but Corinne froze, her eyes flickered. And then she blurted, "County records are irrelevant. HOA authority supersedes all other documentation." I swear I almost laughed out loud. Supersedes county records? That's like saying the neighborhood book club outranks the city council. I realized right then, I wasn't dealing with a neighbor. I was dealing with a woman living in her own version of reality. She gathered her papers dramatically, like an actress wrapping up a courtroom scene. "You have 24 hours to submit compliance paperwork or face formal enforcement," she hissed before storming back toward the gate, muttering "illegal, illegal" under her breath, the gravel crunching under her heels. But fate wasn't done with her performance. As she stomped away, a sheet slipped from her folder and floated to the ground. I picked it up. Not a regulation, not a map, but a receipt. Print Palace Document Services, 20 copies, HOA boundary update, dated yesterday, $87.50. I stood there in the dust of my driveway, holding proof that she'd fabricated her authority less than 24 hours before confronting me. And for the first time since she barged in, I felt a slow smile return. Because she had no idea who she was dealing with, and she had just handed me the first piece of evidence that her empire was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. You ever notice how a single piece of paper can change the way you see everything? That receipt from Print Palace kept me awake half the night. I could almost hear the printer whirring, the smell of warm ink fresh on the page, the thought of Karen walking out with a stack of fake, official documents tucked neatly under her arm. It wasn't just odd. It was dangerous. And deep down, I knew this was bigger than one pushy neighbor. So the next morning, before the dew had even lifted off the grass, I made my first call. Heights HOA. If Karen was their president, as she claimed, then someone in that office could confirm it in seconds. The phone rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. "Good morning, Heights, this is." She sounded warm, professional, the kind of person who knows where every file is stored. "I need to verify a board member," I said, trying to sound casual. "Karen Mitchell, she told me she's your president." The line went quiet. I could hear papers shuffling. Then's voice returned, softer, almost apologetic. "Sir, we don't have anyone by that name. Our president is David, and he's been serving since 2021. Would you like me to email you our full board roster?" I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at the wood grain while her words sank in. Karen wasn't president. She wasn't even on the board. She was nobody. And yet she had marched into my yard demanding fines like she ran the county. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was fraud. The email from hit my inbox 2 minutes later. Official letterhead. Names. Dates. David listed right at the top. And staring at it, I felt that cold realization crawl through me. If she lied about being president, what else had she been lying about? That's when I did what any engineer would do. I started digging. Her name, her job history, her social media. Piece by piece, a story emerged, and it wasn't a pretty one. Karen had worked at an insurance company, collections department. Let that sink in. She spent years pressuring people for payments, making threats sound official, turning fear into dollars. But 8 months ago, that job ended. No new employer listed. No updates except for one strange pattern. 6 months back, her social posts shifted. Suddenly, it was all about property values, community standards, and enforcement. Almost like she'd found herself a new stage. A new role, fake president, real profits. By noon, I had mapped out her entire pattern of activity online. 47 complaints filed across neighborhood forums in the past 6 months. 47. Everything from lawn length to mailbox colors. She wasn't improvising. She was running a system, professional language, fake regulation numbers, staged photos with timestamps. She created an entire shadow HOA in people's minds, and most never thought to question it. That evening, I stepped outside to clear my head. The sun was setting low behind the trees, cicadas buzzing, the gravel cool under my boots. That's when my neighbor Bob appeared, hands in his pockets, walking his old Labrador. He gave me a look that said more than words. Finally, he muttered, "So, you met our neighborhood scammer." The way he said it, relief mixed with frustration, told me everything. I wasn't her first target. "She's fake, right?" I asked. Bob nodded slowly. "Half the street figured it out months ago. She hit me for $60, mailbox violation, claimed it was too tall, took me weeks to realize she had no authority." He pulled out his phone and showed me the neighborhood group chat. Message after message. Karen fined me $40 for a garden gnome. She threatened the Johnsons with foreclosure. My mom paid her $80 for Christmas lights. Each line felt heavier than the last. These weren't just annoyances. This was theft, dressed up in official seals and printed letterheads, and she had been getting away with it for months. Bob sighed, scratching the dog's ears. "We all hate it, but no one wants the drama. People just pay to keep her off their backs." I stood there looking out across the quiet street. Porch lights flicking on. Curtains being drawn. Good, decent people, most of them elderly, handing over money because they trusted authority even when it was counterfeit. And that's when I knew this wasn't just my problem. Karen had been running an organized fraud operation, and unless someone stepped up, she'd keep bleeding this neighborhood dry. The receipt in my pocket wasn't just proof of her lies. It was the first crack in her empire, and I intended to pry it wide open. What would you do if you caught someone red-handed running a con right in your own neighborhood? Most people grumble, maybe warn a friend. But me? I couldn't let it go. Not after seeing that Print Palace receipt. Not after hearing Bob's story. Not after realizing half my new neighbors had been squeezed for cash by a woman with nothing but a manila folder and a loud voice. So I did what I've always done when something doesn't add up. I gathered data. First thing the next morning, Judy was in the kitchen making coffee, the smell of fresh grounds filling the air, pretending she wasn't worried about the storm Karen had kicked up. I sat at the table with my laptop, opening tabs like an investigator instead of a homeowner. Karen Mitchell employment history, public records, addresses, court filings, every trail I could find. The picture sharpened with every click. 8 months unemployed. Old job, collections at insurance. A job built on calling strangers and convincing them they owed money. My stomach turned. It all made sense. She hadn't just woken up one morning and decided to be difficult. She'd taken her old skill set and turned it into a personal racket. No boss, no oversight, just neighbors too polite or too scared to push back. By mid-morning, my search had gone deeper than I ever expected. Her social media was photos of laminated violation notices, captions about protecting community values. She wasn't hiding it. She was showcasing it like it was real work. One post bragged, another fine enforced, another step toward a better neighborhood. The comments below were chilling, neighbors thanking her, apologizing, promising to do better. People really believed. But then I found something worse. A list of payment transactions, digital ones, public enough to track if you knew where to look. Each one labeled HOA fine. Mailbox correction $75, garden violation $50, fence height $60, payment after payment. Not dozens of dollars, hundreds, thousands, all flowing into Karen's personal accounts. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just a pushy neighbor. This was organized fraud. She built a shadow system and convinced ordinary people to pay into it. And the longer she got away with it, the bolder she became. That evening, as the cicadas hummed and the last streaks of daylight faded, Bob strolled by again. His Labrador sniffed around my front gate, tail wagging lazily. Bob gave me a nod, the kind that says he knows you've been digging. "Well," he asked. I didn't bother with small talk. She's been collecting money, real money, from half the street. Bob's eyes narrowed. "We figured, but you've got proof." I showed him my laptop screen, payment records lined up like an accountant's ledger of shame. He whistled low. "Damn, she's been milking us good." Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Careful, folks here, they let her do it because fighting her is worse. She knows how to scare people, threatens liens, lawsuits, even foreclosure. Most just pay to make her go away." That hit me harder than I expected. Good neighbors, retirees, teachers, young families, bullied into silence by a fraud with laminated paper and a loud voice. It wasn't right. I remember standing in my driveway that night, gravel crunching under my boots, looking out over the quiet houses. Windows glowing soft yellow. Curtains shifting as neighbors peeked out but never opened the door. And I made a decision right there under the fatting sky. I wasn't going to be another silent victim. I set up a small camera on the edge of my property, angled only at public spaces, the street, the sidewalk. Nothing private. I wasn't snooping. I was documenting. If Karen wanted to play president, I was about to show the world her theater act in full color, time-stamped and undeniable. Judy raised an eyebrow when she saw me on a ladder mounting the device. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, arms crossed, teacher's tone sharp. I looked down at her, tightening the last screw. When someone cons old women out of their grocery money, yeah, it's necessary. The first night, nothing, just the wind in the trees and a fox cutting across the yard. The second night, though, the footage nearly made me sick. Around 11 p.m., Karen's lights flicked on. Through her wide front window facing the street, I could see her at a desk, printer humming, stacks of paper piling up. Not random notes, not homework. Official-looking forms, violation notices, threat letters. She was building her empire in plain sight. And then came night 3. Mrs. Sweet, elderly Mrs., her posture hunched, clutching an envelope like it was a lifeline. She shuffled up Karen's driveway, nervous, hesitant. Karen met her outside, handed her a violation notice. Took the cash, counted it. I froze watching the screen. Mrs. hands trembled as she apologized for being late to pay a debt she didn't even owe. That's when my jaw tightened, my hands curling into fists, because it wasn't just fraud anymore. It was cruelty, and I wasn't about to let it keep happening. What would you do if someone planted fake evidence in your mailbox, then walked away like they'd just won a case against you? I sat there that night, staring at the footage, and I knew arguing facts with Karen was pointless. She didn't believe in facts. She believed in performance, and if I wanted to beat her, I had to play along just enough to let her trip over her own lies. The next evening when the phone rang, I already knew it was her. The caller ID flashed insurance collections. That was her old job. She hadn't even bothered to block the number. I picked up, and sure enough, her voice came through sharp, rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. Final warning. Submit compliance fee of $200 and architectural review forms within 24 hours or face legal enforcement. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to think I was folding. Then, with just the right tone of hesitation, I said, Karen, I've been thinking maybe you're right. Maybe I should just comply, but I'll need the full documentation package first. Meeting minutes, official forms, board approvals, everything in writing. There was a pause, just long enough for me to picture her blinking in surprise. Then her voice softened, almost triumphant. Excellent decision. I'll prepare comprehensive HOA materials for your review. And that was it. The bait was set. The next morning, right as the sun spilled over the farmhouse roof, Karen marched up my driveway in her most serious business suit. Dark fabric, polished jewelry, hair pulled back like she was about to argue before Congress. She rolled a wheeled briefcase behind her, the kind lawyers use, and spread her papers across my kitchen table like she was hosting a board meeting. I have comprehensive HOA records documenting 3 years of violations and enforcement actions, she announced, her voice carrying that same brittle confidence. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, letting her dig her own grave. Page after page, she laid it out. Fake meeting minutes with her signature at the bottom. Architectural review standards quoting non-existent county codes. Fine schedules with escalating penalties. Even neighbor complaint letters, complete with forged signatures describing issues with my property. To the untrained eye, it looked official. Neat fonts, laminated seals, page numbers. She had put hours into this, but the details gave her away. Meeting minutes citing gatherings that never happened. Regulations referencing chapters that didn't exist. A signature from Bob Wilson, my neighbor, that looked like it had been and pasted from a check. I tapped one of the documents, tilting my head like I was genuinely curious. These minutes show board votes. Can I have contact info for the other board members? I'd like to verify. Her jaw tightened. Board member information is confidential. All right, I said slowly, flipping another page. What about financial records, where the fines go, any official accounts I can see? Her eyes narrowed, her voice rising. Internal financial matters. You are illegally demanding confidential information. There it was again, her magic word. Illegal. Every time she couldn't answer, she threw that word at me like it would shut me down. I let the silence hang, then slid my trump card across the table, a flash drive. Karen, I said evenly, I have video of you planting fake violations, manufacturing evidence, printing your own seals. If this is a legitimate HOA, then why are you fabricating everything? Her reaction wasn't shock, it wasn't guilt, it was rehearsed. She stood so fast her chair scraped against the tile and jabbed a finger at me. Illegal surveillance, illegal harassment, you are violating the law. She snatched her papers, stuffed them into her briefcase with shaking hands, and stormed toward the door, her voice shrill and echoing through the farmhouse walls. And then, right there in my driveway, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Through the window, I watched her packing, voice loud enough to hear muffled words. Illegal occupation, unauthorized surveillance, hostile resident. She was painting me as the criminal, spinning her story with the same confidence that had fooled half the street. As sirens wailed faintly in the distance, drawing closer, my heart pounded. I had evidence stacked neatly on the table, deeds, surveys, the footage. But I couldn't shake one chilling thought. She hadn't hesitated. She'd been ready for this moment, almost like she wanted it. And suddenly I realized I wasn't just exposing a fraud. I was walking into a confrontation she had rehearsed for months. What would you do if the police pulled up to your house, lights flashing, and the person who called them was the very one committing fraud against you? That was the question racing through my head as I heard the sirens growing louder. 2 hours had passed since Karen stormed out, enough time for doubt to creep in, for me to wonder if my evidence would hold up when it mattered most. I sat at the kitchen table with Judy spreading documents like I was preparing for trial, property deeds, county surveys, legal opinions from 3 attorneys, screenshots of payments neighbors had made to Karen, and most importantly, the footage, clear as day, of her planting fake violations in my mailbox. Judy helped me put everything in order, her teacher's handwriting neat on the timeline we'd drawn up. She squeezed my hand once, quietly, before the sound of car doors slamming made us both stiffen. Through the window, I watched 2 officers step out of a cruiser. Officer Walker and Officer Stone, uniforms pressed, posture calm but alert. They weren't rushing like it was an emergency, but the weight of their presence made my chest tighten anyway. And then I saw her. Karen, briefcase in hand, striding forward with the confidence of a CEO about to fire someone. Her voice carried across the yard before they'd even reached the porch. "Officers, thank you for coming. I am Karen Mitchell, president of Heights HOA. This man is illegally occupying property and conducting unauthorized surveillance of legal officials." Legal officials. She said it like she'd been waiting all week to deliver that line. They followed her inside, and suddenly my farmhouse kitchen felt smaller than it ever had. Karen spread her documents on the table with a flourish, sliding them toward the officers like exhibits in a courtroom. "As you can see, multiple violations, 3 years of noncompliance, and illegal surveillance footage obtained without authorization." For a second, I watched the officers' faces as they scanned her papers. Professional seals, neatly laminated pages. If you didn't know better, it could look convincing. And that's when fear clawed up my throat. What if they believed her? Officer Walker turned to me. "Sir, she's claiming unauthorized occupation and surveillance. Can you explain?" I nodded, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can, but first, please look at this." I handed over my evidence binder, starting with the property deed, original county seals, historical boundaries going back more than a century, then the surveys, then the legal opinions. And finally, I opened my laptop, pulling up the footage. Karen at her laminating station. Karen planting a violation notice in my mailbox. Karen snapping photos to make her staged evidence look real. Officer Stone leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he watched. He hit pause, rewound, then looked at Karen. "Ma'am, this shows you placing the notice yourself. Can you explain that?" Her face went red. "Illegal surveillance, harassment, this footage is inadmissible." She waved her papers wildly. "These are the official records. County offices are corrupt. They're conspiring against legitimate authority." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I could see the shift happen in the officers' eyes, that moment when they realized they weren't dealing with a civil dispute. They were staring at fraud. Officer Walker spoke carefully. "Ma'am, Heights confirms David is their president. You're not listed anywhere. Do you have any documentation to prove otherwise?" Karen's voice cracked as she pulled out another sheet. "Yes, I filed a police report about his illegal surveillance. That proves." Walker held the page up, squinting. The formatting was wrong. The case number didn't exist. The language sounded like it had been lifted from a courtroom drama. "Ma'am, this isn't one of our reports. Did you create this yourself?" Her face twisted and she shouted, "Illegal conspiracy, illegal fraud by corrupt police." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Judy's hand gripped mine under the table. The officers exchanged a look, calm but firm, and I could see the conclusion written on their faces. They weren't buying her act. Officer Stone set the fake report down gently. "Ma'am, impersonating authority and filing false reports are serious offenses. I strongly suggest you stop this now." But Karen only grew louder, her voice echoing through the farmhouse walls. "You can't silence legal officials. You're all part of the conspiracy." And in that moment, I realized something chilling. Karen didn't just know she was lying, she believed it. Have you ever watched someone's entire empire of lies collapse in front of an audience? Because that's what it felt like the moment the real HOA finally got involved. The day after the police left, without arresting me, without charging me, despite all of Karen's screaming, I got a call. A calm, steady male voice introduced himself. "This is David, president of Heights HOA. I understand there's been some confusion involving one of your neighbors. Could we meet?" I'll never forget how professional he sounded. No threats, no arrogance, just a man trying to clear the air. We arranged for him to come by that evening, and when he pulled into my driveway, the contrast between him and Karen couldn't have been sharper. He drove an old, wore a plain button-down shirt, and carried nothing but a leather folder. He shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye. "First, let me be clear, your property isn't in our HOA. It never has been. Whatever she's telling you, it's false." Relief flooded me, but then came the part that turned my stomach. He opened his folder and slid over a stack of emails and complaints. Dozens of residents had reached out to him over the past 6 months, all saying the same thing. Karen had demanded fines, issued violations, and threatened enforcement. "She's not on our board. She never has been," David said, his voice heavy with frustration. "But people believe her because she's persuasive and they're afraid of conflict. Honestly, we've been trying to contain the damage quietly. But now that she's targeting properties outside the HOA, it's out of control." That's when Judy, who had been sitting quietly with a notebook, leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time to stop being quiet." And just like that, the plan formed. 3 nights later, David scheduled a community meeting at the local rec center. Word spread fast. Flyers went up. Emails were sent. Even Bob and his old Labrador shuffled in. By 7 o'clock, the room was full, folding chairs lined in rows, coffee urns steaming on a side table, neighbors murmuring, some anxious, some angry. Karen arrived last. She burst through the doors like she was walking into court, briefcase in one hand, stack of official documents in the other. The room went silent. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she marched to the front, setting up her papers like she owned the place. "I'll be addressing the violations first," she announced loudly, not waiting for David to open the meeting. "Multiple residents remain out of compliance. This undermines property values and will not be tolerated." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, others rolled their eyes. Bob muttered under his breath, "Here we go again." David stood calmly, holding up a single sheet of paper. "Before we begin, I need to clarify something. This is the official board roster of Heights HOA, signed, dated, notarized. Karen Mitchell is not and has never been on this board." You could feel the shift in the room. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering. A few gasped softly. Karen's face flushed red, but she snapped back instantly. "Forgery! Those are forged documents. I have the real records." She waved her laminated fakes high in the air, the glossy paper catching the fluorescent lights. That's when I stood up. My heart hammered in my chest, but I knew the moment had come. "If they're real, then explain this." I pulled out my laptop and projected the footage onto the wall. Karen, caught on camera, sliding papers into my mailbox. Karen collecting cash from Mrs. Karen laminating her official notices at midnight like she was running a print shop assembly line. The room went dead silent except for the audio from the footage. Her muttering, "Illegal, illegal," under her breath as she staged her scams. Mrs. gasped, covering her mouth. Bob sat up, vindicated. Even the officers who had attended off-duty, curious about the case, exchanged glances. And then the sound of chairs scraping filled the room, neighbors standing one after another, speaking out. "She charged me $80 for Christmas lights. She fined me for a bird bath. She said she'd put a lien on my house if I didn't pay." Voices overlapped, anger swelled, a lifetime of frustration poured out all at once. Karen stood frozen, clutching her papers like a shield, her face twisted between rage and panic. "This is all doctored. Lies, you're all conspiring against me." Her voice cracked, but she kept shouting louder and louder until it wasn't authority anymore, it was desperation. David raised his hand for calm. "Neighbors, thank you for speaking. We will handle this formally. But tonight proves something important. None of us has to live in fear of fabricated authority." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight lift. She had been exposed not just to me, but to everyone. But as the meeting ended and people filed out, Karen didn't disappear quietly. She lingered by the door, muttering, scribbling in her notebook, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. And I realized this wasn't over. Have you ever noticed how some people, once cornered, don't back down, they double down? That was Karen. Most folks, when they're caught lying in front of their whole community, would shrink, disappear, maybe even apologize. But not her. Karen came out of that meeting like a storm that had only just started. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. At first, I thought it was just a stray deer wandering past the driveway. But then I heard it again, heavier this time, footsteps. I pulled back the curtain, and there she was. Karen, flashlight in one hand, a clipboard in the other, walking up and down my property line like she was inspecting it. The beam cut across the fence, the shed, the barn. She was taking notes, muttering under her breath, her shadow stretching long across the dirt. I felt Judy shift in bed beside me. "She's out there again, isn't she?" Her voice was tired, worn down by weeks of stress. "Yeah," I whispered, gripping the curtain. "But this time, I think she wants me to know she's here." By dawn, an envelope was taped to my door. "Final notice," written in bold red marker. Inside was a letter, all caps, claiming she was initiating foreclosure proceedings on my property. No stamps, no legal headers, just her words typed up, signed with her dramatic flourish. I laughed bitterly. Foreclosure? She had no jurisdiction. But the more I thought about it, the more dangerous it felt. Because this wasn't about the law anymore, it was about intimidation. Later that day, Bob dropped by with his dog. He handed me his phone, showing me a message Karen had sent to the neighborhood group chat at 2 a.m. is illegally occupying land. He is under HOA eviction review. Those who support him may face violations. "She's turning the neighbors against you," Bob muttered, "trying to make you the enemy." And in a way, it worked. That evening, Judy and I walked down the street, and I could feel it, the awkward glances, the half-smiles. Some folks avoided eye contact altogether, not because they believed her, but because they feared becoming her next target. It would have been easy to let the anger consume me, to march over there, tear the fake notices off her door, shout until my voice broke. But I kept reminding myself, the louder she screamed, the more desperate she was. So instead, I documented every late-night inspection, every envelope, every threatening message. My porch camera caught her circling my house twice more, each time muttering "illegal, illegal" under her breath like a chant. I saved it all. But Karen wasn't content with paper and words anymore. She escalated. One Friday morning, I came outside to find spray paint across my barn door. "Illegal occupant." Big, sloppy red letters, the kind that dripped like blood down the wood. My heart sank, not because I believed her, but because I knew exactly how this looked to the neighbors. Fear painted in public. I spent hours scrubbing it off, the chemical sting burning my hands, sweat dripping into my eyes. And the whole time I could feel her watching from across the street, blinds barely parted, waiting for me to snap. Judy finally walked out, set a cold bottle of water beside me, and said softly, "She's losing control. That means you're close. Just hold on." And maybe she was right, because the very next day, the retaliation peaked. I found a letter shoved in my mailbox, not a fake violation this time, but a threat. No HOA seals, no formatting, just scrawled handwriting, "Drop it or you'll regret it." The words chilled me more than anything else she'd done, because this wasn't theater anymore. This was personal. That night I sat on the porch, boots tapping against the wood, the cicadas buzzing like static in the air. I thought about every neighbor she had scammed, every dollar she had taken, every time she had shouted illegal at me like it was her shield. And I realized something. The louder she got, the closer she was to breaking. And break she would, because the final confrontation was coming. You ever feel that moment when the storm finally breaks? When all the shouting, the threats, the lies can't stretch any further and something has to snap. That's exactly where things stood with Karen. After weeks of fake violations, midnight inspections, vandalism, and threats, I knew it was only a matter of time before she pushed too far. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. The kind of day that should been peaceful. Sun warm on the fields, kids riding bikes down the lane, the smell of someone grilling a few houses over. I was repairing a fence post when I heard it again, the metallic squeak of my gate. And there she was. Karen, storming across my yard, briefcase swinging, voice raised before she even reached me. "This is your final removal notice," she screamed, shoving a laminated sheet into my chest. "Failure to vacate will result in law enforcement action." I looked at the paper, then back at her. My hands were rough with dust and wood splinters, but steady. "Karen," I said quietly, "this ends today." She laughed, high, brittle, forced. "You think you can defy legal authority? I've already filed liens. I've reported you to state officials. You'll be out by the end of the week." What she didn't know was that I wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, one by one, neighbors began stepping into the street. Bob with his dog, Mrs. clutching her purse. Families, couples, retirees. They weren't hiding behind curtains this time. They were standing tall, watching. Some had phones out, recording. And then David arrived, HOA president in his modest, walking calmly toward us. He held up a folder. "Karen, enough. We've filed a restraining order against you. Law enforcement has been, you are not president, you never were." Her face drained of color, then flushed bright red. "Lies, illegal documents, conspiracy." Her voice cracked as she shouted the same words she'd repeated 100 times, but now they sounded hollow, desperate, almost pathetic. That's when the county sheriff's SUV pulled up. 2 deputies stepped out, their presence heavy and unshakable. One of them addressed her firmly. "Ms. Mitchell, we've received multiple complaints of fraud, harassment, and impersonation. You need to come with us." She spun, wild-eyed, pointing at me. "He's the fraud. He's the illegal occupant. Arrest him. He's the criminal." But no one moved. The deputies didn't even look my way. All eyes were on her. And in that silence, you could feel it, the power she thought she had evaporating into thin air. Karen's knees buckled, and for a second I thought she might collapse. Instead, she clutched her briefcase, whispering "illegal, illegal," under her breath, as if the word itself could still protect her. But the deputies took her gently by the arms, guiding her toward the SUV. Her papers scattered onto the gravel, fluttering in the breeze like discarded theater props. The neighborhood stood there in silence as the car door shut. Then, slowly, the tension lifted. People exhaled. Conversations started. Bob clapped me on the shoulder. Mrs. smiled weakly through tears. And Judy just wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "It's over." In the days that followed, we learned the full story. Karen had been filing fake notices for months, collecting cash payments, forging signatures, and even drafting counterfeit legal reports. The sheriff's office charged her with fraud, impersonation, and harassment. For the first time in years, the neighborhood breathed free. And me, I sat on my porch one evening, boots dusty, the smell of cut grass in the air, and thought about everything. About how one person's hunger for control had nearly poisoned an entire community. About how easy it is to fall for authority when it sounds confident enough. About how fragile trust really is. Sometimes the strongest stand isn't shouting back. It's waiting, documenting, holding your ground when every instinct tells you to run. Because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like a man quietly sitting on his porch, listening to the cicadas, knowing that the storm has finally passed. And as the sun dipped low over the fields, I realized the farmhouse was no longer just my dream home. It was my proof that truth, no matter how delayed, always speaks louder than lies. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.